I've been wondering for years how a cult leader convinces thousands of people to trust him, even when the entire world turns against him and the cult. So I decided to do some research on Jim Jones, the People's Temple cult, and Jonestown to understand what's actually going on here. In 1961, psychiatrist Robert Lifton at Harvard Medical School mapped the exact mechanisms used to replace a person's independent reality with the leader's reality. He called it thought reform. Jim Jones used every single one of these mechanisms to indoctrinate his followers. So does Donald Trump. Here are the 6 mechanisms that explains how one man convinces thousands of people that moving to the jungle and dying for him makes sense. 1. The creation of a savior. Jones didn't start by demanding loyalty. He started by giving people something they never had before. Jones built one of the first racially integrated congregations in Indiana. He fed the poor. He marched for civil rights. He pulled tumors out of people that were actually just chicken parts wrapped in tissue, and they believed him anyway. Psychologist William Swan, at the University of Texas at Austin, studied what happens when a person's identity merges completely with a leader. He called it identity fusion. His enemies become your enemies. His survival becomes your survival. An attack on him feels like an attack on your own body. Once that happens, facts become irrelevant. You are not just disagreeing with their politics. You are threatening their very existence. Trump did the same thing. He told forgotten Americans that the system had failed them and only he could fix it. The MAGA cult was not a political position. It was a personality. When you criticize Trump, you are telling his followers their own judgment was wrong, that their own instincts are broken, that their own identity was a mistake. Jones didn't build followers. He built extensions of himself. And those people don't leave. They don't question, and they don't doubt. They just follow all the way to the end, just like some of the most fanatical MAGA supporters, until there's nothing left. 2. Invented enemies. Once Jones had followers, he needed to keep them. The most powerful way to keep people is not love, it's fear. Psychologist Jeff Greenberg at the University of Arizona developed a landmark study in 1986 on what happens to people when they feel their survival is under threat. He called it terror management theory. When people believe they're in danger, their brain stops evaluating information and starts looking for protection. They cluster around their leader. They reject outsiders. They become more extreme. The more scared they are, the more loyal they become. Jones invented enemies everywhere. The government was watching. The CIA was plotting. People who defected were traitors. Every piece of negative press was proof of a conspiracy. Sound familiar? The more dangerous the outside world seemed, the tighter his followers held on. Trump runs the same machine. Immigrants are invading. The deep state is plotting. The media is lying. Every institution that produces evidence against him is part of the conspiracy. A leader who makes followers feel like their survival is under constant threat does not need to earn loyalty every day. Fear does that for him. 3. The staged persecution. Jones did not just tell followers they were under attack. He showed them. He staged fake assassination attempts with blood-stained shirts and miraculous recoveries. He ran drills where followers were handed cups and told the liquid was poison. When they didn't die, he told them it was a loyalty test. In 1961, psychiatrist Robert Lifton at Harvard Medical School identified the mechanism that makes manufactured chaos so effective. He called it milieu control, the deliberate manipulation of the environment, so the leader becomes the only stable point. When everything outside feels dangerous and unpredictable, the leader becomes the only thing that makes sense. His followers believe that if this many powerful people want him dead, he must matter. And surviving together bonded them in a way nothing else could. Trump ran the same playbook. In 2011, Barack Obama mocked him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Trump has said himself that night motivated him to run for president. Then came 91 felony counts, a bullet in Butler, Pennsylvania, a second attempt on a golf course, a third attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Every single time his polls went up, every single time his followers said, "See, they are terrified of him." Jones staged his persecution. Some of Trump's were real. The result was identical. The more powerful the enemy, the more important the leader must be. 4. The collapse of reality. Once Jim Jones had his followers isolated and afraid, he made himself the only source of truth. Ari Kruglansky at the University of Maryland studied what happens when people stop tolerating uncertainty. He called it the need for cognitive closure. When people feel threatened, their brain locks onto one clear answer and rejects everything that contradicts it. Uncertainty feels dangerous. Certainty feels safe, even when the certainty is a lie. And once the brain commits to that one answer, it builds walls around it. New information doesn't update the belief. It gets rejected as a threat. Followers in Jonestown had no access to outside news. Letters to and from home were monitored. Visitors were controlled. Defectors from Jonestown were called traitors. When followers heard something that contradicted Jim Jones, they were taught one response. This is what the enemy wants you to think. Contradictions were not problems. They were proof the conspiracy was bigger than anyone knew. The more evidence that mounted against Jim Jones, the more convinced his followers became that powerful forces were trying to destroy the only man telling them the truth. This is how desperate the need for cognitive closure is. Trump built the same fortress. Fake news, enemy of the people, every judge who rules against him is corrupt. Every witness is a plant. Every Republican who turns on him is a traitor. His followers do not evaluate the evidence. They reject it all before it lands. Jones needed a jungle in South America to build that fortress. Trump built that same fortress inside people's phones. 5. Why people stay. By the time followers realized something was wrong in Jonestown, it was too late to admit it. Psychologist Barry Staw at the University of California, Berkeley, studied what happens when people invest heavily in a decision that turns out to be wrong. He called it escalation of commitment. Most people know it as the sunk cost fallacy. But in a cult, it becomes something darker. It becomes what I call the sunk cost of shame. The more a person invests in something, the harder it becomes to walk away. Because walking away means admitting everything was wasted. The money, the time, the relationships, the identity. The brain will do almost anything to avoid that pain and that conclusion. So instead of leaving, his followers doubled down. They invested more, defended harder. Because if you stay, you can still be right. If you leave, you have to admit you were wrong about everything. Jim Jones's followers had to sign over their bank accounts, signed false confessions, cut off their families, moved to the jungle in South America. To admit Jones was wrong meant admitting they had destroyed their own lives for a lie. So they stayed. And the longer they stayed, the more they had to lose by leaving. Trump's followers are in the same trap. They defended him at Thanksgiving. They cut off friends. They put the flag on their truck, wore the hat. A decade of loyalty publicly performed in front of everyone they know. To admit Trump is a fraud means admitting they were the problem for the last 10 years. Jones did not need guards to keep people at Jonestown. The shame kept them there. Trump does not need to threaten his followers. The shame keeps them in the cult. 6. The jungle. When outside pressure became too great, Jones made one move. He took his followers somewhere no outside force could reach them. He moved his followers to French Guiana. Jonestown was not a commune. It was a controlled environment where Jones' psychology became the movement's psychology. Sleep deprivation, forced labor, public humiliation, armed guards. Jones became paranoid and unstable, and his paranoia became their paranoia. Albert Bandura at Stanford University studied how ordinary people commit extraordinary harm without feeling like monsters. He called it moral disengagement. Each small step feels justified. Each line crossed makes the next one easier. The brain doesn't experience a single catastrophic moral failure. It experiences 1,000 tiny ones that each feel reasonable in the moment. Jones' followers did not wake up one day and decide to drink the Flavor Aid. They arrived at the moment through 1,000 small surrenders, each one feeling more normal than the last. When Congressman Leo Ryan flew to Jonestown to investigate, Jones ordered his assassination at the airstrip. Then he ordered everyone to drink the Flavor Aid he had his men make up in vats. Over 900 people died. 304 of them were children. This is how cult leaders work. A savior appears, enemies are invented, reality collapses. The exits close, and by the time they realize they're in a cult, they have given too much to walk away. Jones built his cult in the jungle with armed guards. Trump is doing the same thing with a phone and a Wi-Fi connection. Both of them built cults. Every manipulation Jones used has been studied, named, and documented. Trump is using every single one of his tactics. One of these cults ended in a jungle in South America. The other one is collapsing in front of us.